The Anthology of Balaji is the latest book from Eric Jorgenson, who you probably know from the Almanac of Naval Ravikant. Eric wanted to distill all of Balaji's wisdom, particularly around how to learn, how to gather information, how to interpret media and the news, and how to build a company that can shape the future. So I would say this is a very powerful book if you want to work in technology, if you do work in technology. It's excellent if you want to build a business, or if you're just interested in where the future might go with new medical technology, with cryptocurrency, with startups, with 3D printing, flying cars, like all of those kinds of things. This would probably be a very interesting book for you. So obviously I took a lot of highlights, got a lot of good lessons from it, and I'm going to share some of those with you today. So right off the bat, one of the first topics that Eric and Balaji dive into is the value of technology and human life. Because Balaji believes very strongly that with the appropriate application of technology, we could basically end mortality. He says, the ultimate purpose of technology is to reduce mortality. At first that sounds crazy, but let's start here. The purpose of technology is to reduce scarcity. Think about how a breakthrough is described: faster, smaller, cheaper, better. All these words mean that with a new technology, we can do more with less. Mortality is the main source of scarcity. If we had more time or infinite time, we would be less concerned with whether something was faster. The reason speed has value is because time has value, and the reason time has value is because human lifespans are finite. And for context, Balaji's first business was in medicine, biology, something related to genetics. And so it's an area he understands pretty well. And there's a very popular essay, The Fable of the Dragon Tyrant, that makes the argument that the only reason we think immortality is impossible is because we're so used to being mortal, and we think that being mortal is important. Honestly, I kind of agree with that. I do think mortality has some significance to our lives, but this idea that we could potentially achieve some form of immortality through technology, or at least significantly expand our lifespans, I think is not only true, but is something worth putting more and more energy into. And we see people like Brian Johnson with Blueprint trying to do this today. And one thing that Balaji talks about as being a big impediment to successfully figuring out how we can expand our lives or expand our lifespan is regulations, government, the things that are standing in the way of technological progress. He says, in 2009, outdated regulations on taxis and hotels held back $100 billion companies. Remember, $100 billion only shows the value captured by Uber and Airbnb. The total value created is much higher, unseen, and the time saved in parking, how much employees are paid, how many millions of drivers and hosts are paid. So in the point that Uber and Airbnb kind of like broke down some of the regulation around hotels and taxis, and they created these massive new businesses, all these employees, and really improved our lives as a result. I remember I was living in Pittsburgh when Uber and Airbnb, or when Uber and Lyft started to really come on the scene. And there were no taxis in Pittsburgh. It was impossible to get around. And then suddenly there was Uber and there was Lyft, and you could just call one from your phone, and that was magical. So for cities like that didn't have that good transportation infrastructure, it was totally game changing, and breaking through the regulatory hurdles or just ignoring them and doing it anyway was totally worth it. And so he goes on to make this point that now things get really interesting. If that was just taxi and hotel regulations, what is the FDA holding back? What is the FAA holding back? And what's the SEC holding back? These are pretty powerful and interesting questions, right? There's another great book, Where is My Flying Car, by James Storr, I want to say. I'll link it below, but which basically argues that we could have flying cars by now, if not for a combination of lack of trying and regulation. There's a very popular private passenger plane called a Cessna that has not really gotten any more advanced, but it's gotten significantly more expensive to buy one and to build one. And personal planes in general have gotten less and less popular as they've gotten more expensive to produce. And that's mostly because of additional regulatory requirements. And there's some argument for the safety that comes with that. But there also has to be a limit on these things, because if you can't innovate, then you can never figure out safer, better, faster ways to do things. And Balaji makes a good point here about the limits of the effectiveness of regulation. He says regulators don't have the same level of fast, precise digital feedback between buyer and seller. He's comparing government regulation to just regulation by the markets. Balaji says, today, if you're a bad actor, you're banned from Uber or Airbnb within a few hours. These companies are accomplishing the goals of a regulated marketplace by banning bad actors and giving low ratings to poor quality actors without coercion. We don't have to send the police to raid and shut down a bad hotel or throw someone in jail for an expired taxi license. We achieve the same objectives in a better way. Because obviously, when you start to say, oh, maybe we should cut back a lot of the FDA limits on stuff, we should cut back a lot of the fee controls on things, we should cut back FAA regulations, we should cut back all these things, people start to say, oh my God, but then people start dying, it'll get so dangerous, companies take advantage of people, la la la, all these bad things will happen. And Balaji's making the point that there are many ways to regulate bad actions besides government and besides police. And in some ways, those other forms of regulation can be much faster. They can be more measured, right? They can be more targeted. Imagine if every time somebody was rude to a taxi driver, the government had to send out somebody to like give them a fine. It would just be ridiculous. But in Uber, it's really easy to just give them a bad rating and decrease their ability to get a new taxi over time, right? These forms of regulation are actually better, even though they aren't from government regulators. And he goes on to say that there's something true to this with medicine too. A direct example is new medicine. Someone has to be the first to try a new surgery or drug. The people taking the risk are heroes. They should get awards and prizes. As a society, we should allow this and reward them. Without someone taking that risk, millions of people won't get a cure. And I've heard this story, he doesn't have it here, but I've heard it for during COVID. The original versions of the vaccines were actually developed, I think, within a few days. But then it took 9 months for those vaccines to actually make it to market because of all of the FDA regulation and whatnot that they had to go through. Now, obviously, before mass production and mass market, mass distribution, and certainly before any expectation of people taking a medicine, there should be pretty extensive risk testing for it, right? But if somebody is dying and they want to take an experimental new medicine to try to cure it, they should be allowed to do that, because that is how we figure out if that stuff is safe or not. And people who are willing to take those risks are heroes. He gives this great example of in the CRC Handbook of Chemistry and Physics, where some of the really old compounds have smell and taste listed. In the past, some chemist smelled cyanide. The last thing he did was scroll down "smells like almonds" as he died. He took a hit for the team to advance science. And this is just something that people don't do anymore. There's another great book I'm going to cover soon called Novacine by James Lovelock. He created the Gaia theory of the Earth, and he talks about how when he was working in his lab in the 40s or 50s, they were testing the limits of human tolerance for burns, and so they just burned themselves. Like, they didn't want to test it on rabbits because that felt wrong, so they were just holding like smoldering irons to their arms and things to see at what limit human tissue starts to break down and can't handle it anymore. I feel like we don't have as much of that kind of science anymore, because if we did, we would hear about it. There's all of this additional level of like IRB oversight on things, which hinders a certain amount of innovation because you can't move as quickly. And again, if someone is willing to risk their life for science, they should kind of be allowed to do that, because we all end up benefiting from it. And another good point he makes on this is this difference, or about this difference between technology and government, is that there's maybe this myth that because there's so much wealth in technology, that technology is increasing inequality. But technology is actually a very equalizing force. He says, everybody becomes more equal because they have the same iPhone or Android phone experience. They've got the same Google, Wikipedia, GitHub, anything that is digital. It's kind of wild to think that the richest person in the world, whoever that is today, Bezos, Musk, Buffett, whatever, they probably use the same phone you do. They don't drive the same car, they don't live in the same kind of house, but the phone is probably the same. The television might not be that different either. Or these tech devices, and they're definitely using like the same Wikipedia, the same Twitter, all of those things. So technology is very democratizing in this sense. And when you look at industries that technology has more heavily touched, especially like electronics and consumer goods, those prices have come down, stayed down, those businesses have gotten more efficient. The businesses and areas of the economy that have gotten less efficient, that have gotten more expensive and harder to afford, and more unequal, are the ones where government is involved. He says the consumer economy actually creates a form of equality. At a massive, massive scale, you produce the same product for everybody. There's not that much difference between a top-end smartphone and a low-end one. Every area the government touches sees prices inflate. That's due to regulations or subsidies, which impairs the increases of labor productivity from technology. For example, in medicine, a doctor is required to be in the loop for any diagnostic decisions, even if artificial intelligence can do it better than 99% of doctors. And 99% is just in early experiments. Once you get the AI into production with all the data, it will become better than every doctor. And the AI example is a good one because this is actually an area where regulation is probably going to lead to people dying unnecessarily. It seems that we're already getting to the point where custom trained GPT models can do better medical diagnoses than most doctors. And so in some ways, it's actually unethical to not use that, right? Like, why have all of these unnecessary deaths? It's the same thing with driverless cars. Yes, there are going to be accidents, but I think the Tesla full self-driving already has 1/10 of the accident rate of a normal human driver. And so in some ways, it's actually immoral to prevent that from being used in most places, right? Even though you think like, oh, if we allow this, some people will die. It's like, yes, but all these other people will not die. But those ones don't get in the headlines. They're not in the big, exciting statistics. And so they often get forgotten about. And so I think this point that the area the government touches and regulates, those areas become more unequal, they become more slow or lethargic, explains why education, medicine, those types of fields get so expensive, whereas, yeah, technology just keeps getting better and better, and software especially, because that's the big area that government has mostly stayed out of the last 20 years, and that's where all the innovation is, right? I don't think that's a coincidence. Speaking of technology, let's move on to one of Balaji's favorite topics, and one of my favorite topics too, which is cryptocurrency. And Balaji says, if the internet was programmable communication, crypto is programmable money. Before the internet, you needed a deal with a telecom company to deploy information transferring code. Before Bitcoin, you needed a deal with a bank to deploy value transferring code. This is such a great encapsulation of what is special about cryptocurrency. Because before crypto, you did need some sort of bank relationship in order to move money around in the world. With crypto, you don't need that anymore. And yes, there are bugs. Yes, it's early. It can be expensive. But it does allow you to move money between people, across borders, between people and businesses with no intermediary. And that's never really been possible online. It's possible in the real world with cash or gold, but it's never been possible on the internet. So it is this very cool change in how the internet functions. And Balaji goes on to explain that those saying crypto is just another asset class sound like those who said the internet is just another media outlet. They didn't understand programmability, permissionlessness, or peer-to-peer, and they overestimated the robustness of legacy institutions. History repeats with crypto. Crypto is more than an asset class because it transforms the custody, trading, issuance, governance, and programmability of anything scarce. It's a new financial system, not just some ticker symbol. The internet subsumed TV, radio, newspapers, movies, and created new kinds of media. Crypto likewise will subsume stocks, bonds, commodities, and create new kinds of assets. I really think this is such a great explanation, again, of just like what is cool about crypto below all of the hype and the mania. Because there is a very real interesting technology there, and it is going to unlock a lot of new ways we can use money on the internet and use money with technology that we can't do today. But that gets kind of overshadowed again by the FTXs and the Bored Apes and all of that stuff. The one other thing he says on crypto here that I think is very poignant is that a lot of people who are super into crypto, super into Bitcoin, think that, like, the whole world financial system is going to transfer to Bitcoin in the next 10 years. And that's just ridiculous, right? That's not going to happen. It's going to take a lot longer. And Balaji makes if it even happens, right? It's not even a guarantee, but if it happened, it will take longer. And Balaji explains why. By 2040, everyone under 30 will have never known a world without Bitcoin. It may as well be gold. That is the long-term case for replacement. And I think this is really true. And there's a good article called the 3-generation theory of Bitcoin or something that talks about this, where my parents are like boomer generation. They're never going to put a significant amount of their net worth into Bitcoin, Ethereum, any of those. My generation, millennial, I'm pretty comfortable having a decent chunk of my net worth in crypto, but I still, there's still that tiny bit of hesitancy there. If Bitcoin keeps functioning well and it keeps operating and getting more and more embedded in our financial system, then yeah, in 17 years, somebody who's 30 would be perfectly comfortable having 10% or whatever of their net worth in Bitcoin, because that's not really any different than gold, right? It might even be a better version of gold in that world. And so it's just going to take a while for it to become a normal thing. People who really believe in it have to be more patient. Aside from Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, there are two other really exciting future areas of technology that Balaji talks about here. He talks about a bunch, but these are the ones that I highlighted that I wanted to mention because I think they're cool. And one thing Balaji mentions is that he's increasingly thinking of the physical world as a printout of digital wealth. Ask yourself, what can hitting a button do? In 2010, one button could print a PDF. In 2020, one button can deliver any item. In 2030, maybe one button can build anything. And I love the way that he separates that out, right? In the 2010s, the most you could do to take the online world offline, really, with the click of a button was to print a PDF, right? Or print a document, print anything, print a slideshow, something. But now you can click a button and get anything in your city delivered to you, almost anything in the world delivered to you via Amazon, right? You can summon things to your house by clicking a button on a computer or a phone. That's really cool, right? Obviously, there's a lot of intermediaries there, but that's wild, right? That's really, really powerful. And so this is a great question to ask, which is where does that go next, right? What is the next thing we'll be able to do by clicking a button? And this idea that one button can build anything, I think there's probably something there, right? The 3D printing is getting better, and there's probably a lot more that can be done there. And again, I want to reference this book, Where's My Flying Car? I should really just do a video on it. But they talk about, or he talks about in that book, how we could have these uber powerful 3D printers that can basically print anything. Right. So, I mean, they could even print food. They could print you a new phone. They could print anything that you could possibly need if you have access to the schematics for it. And that's a very real future that we could experience in our lifetime. So what will you be able to do with the click of a button in 2030? I think there's a lot of exciting potential there that's worth thinking about, or that's worth working on. The other thing that he talks about here is getting back to the immortality idea, getting back to life extension. And he highlights that life extension is maybe the wrong way to think about it. You want to think about youth extension. He says, when you deal with mechanical things like cars, you can calculate a failure rate for each part. Some cars are lucky and never experience any of those failures. Out of 10,000 cars, 1 out of 10,000 cars may make it 50 years or 100 years without being repaired because the errors don't accumulate. By random chance, a car might be able to last a long time. Humans aren't like that. There is a hard drop-off at 120 years old. If humans broke down like cars, some humans would live to 1,000. Instead, what happens is a predictable and coordinated process where people kind of go gray and get fat in similar ways as they age. And this is how we know there's some degree of programming in us for aging. Because if we weren't meant to age and die, then yeah, we would have this much wider distribution of outcomes. People would just die on accident, and there would be a couple people who are like thousands of years old purely by chance. But we all die around the same fairly narrow age range, and like most animals do, right? So that suggests that there is something in our DNA that is programming us to decay and die, probably as a way to incentivize us to keep reproducing and spreading it and whatnot. And so Balaji says, maybe we can unwire that. And people are working on it right now. But he says that a better term than life extension might be youth extension. Many people think life extension would just mean more years as a senior citizen. But if we could keep you at 20-something from a physiological standpoint, or even get you back there, that would be very different. So you might not want to spend an extra 50 years as an 80-year-old. That maybe doesn't sound great, but an extra 50 years as a 30-year-old, that'd be pretty sick, right? I don't think anybody would really complain about that. And that's really what he's trying to get at here with life extension and youth extension. And to the extent that's possible, that is very exciting. Because obviously a longer, healthy life would certainly be desirable and certainly be better than a more dystopian solution where we just upload our brains into machines or something like that. Next, let's move into some of Balaji's opinions on politics and truth and knowledge. And this is where he gets a little spicier. It's fun. And he makes some fairly compelling points. So let's dive into them. Now, the first thing he does is distinguish between political and scientific facts. A political fact is true if enough other people believe it to be true. For example, who the president is or where the border of a country is. That's actually a psychological phenomenon. If you can install software to enough people's brains, you can change those truths. That is social consensus. Right? The president is not an actual thing in the physical world. It's just an idea that we all agree on. In Sapiens, you've all know Harari referred to this as intersubjective myths or intersubjective beliefs. They're things that are only true because we all agree that they are true. And then Balaji goes on to say that on the other side, some things are purely technical. A technical fact is the result of an equation or the diameter of a virus under an electron microscope, the result of physical constants. What people think does not change technical truth. Physical facts are independent of any human being. An alien would come to the same conclusions. This distinction is really important because a lot of people mix them up and they think that a political idea or a political statement is a technical fact, and it never is, right? Most things are actually just opinions or political facts. They are not technical facts. There's a big difference between math and philosophy, right? Or math and politics. And when people get really, really upset at somebody else for their ideas, it's often because they have different political beliefs, different political facts than them. Nobody gets upset at somebody for saying 2 + 2 = 5, right? Because it's like, oh yeah, you're just wrong, right? Like, here's the math and that's incorrect. But if somebody disagrees with you about your political party or something, well, neither of you is necessarily right or wrong, because those aren't real, those aren't like facts in the way math is a fact. But he goes on to explain that science has in some way been corrupted by this distinction between political and technical facts. He says people confuse genuine science, like Maxwell's equations, with science, like a paper that came out last week. Maxwell's equations have had countless trillions of independent replications. The study from last week might not even have shared a public data set. Yet we as a society are supposed to be basing large decisions on this one new study. Many people think that peer review means independent replication and confirmation of results. No, it doesn't, he explains. Peer review usually means months of delay while a few folks in your field write an email-length criticism of the paper and ask for more work. Peer review does not mean somebody went out and actually tested what's being published. It means they looked at it and said, yeah, this looks good. Right? So if something has not been replicated or tested, then there's really no reason to believe a single paper that comes out. It requires replication. So he explains that the form of science today, the way science exists, is this peer-reviewed journal paper process, but that's actually very unscientific. The peer review doesn't get us really any closer to the truth. He says the substance of science, the thing that actually makes a science thing, experiment, whatever, more scientifically proven, is independent replication. If people aren't out there testing it, then we don't actually have any evidence of its validity or illegitimacy. And so again, it's very tempting to say science discovered or science figured out, blah, 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 but it was just one paper that got peer reviewed. You don't necessarily know anything from that. And the last part of this that's really important is that the popularity of an idea does not make it more or less true. It says people around you repeating the same idea may have gotten it from the same source. This fools our truth sensors, but popularity does not equal truth. There is no point debating someone who can't whip out plots, primary URLs, or raw data. Argue with signal sources, not signal repeaters. I love that. Argue with signal sources, not signal repeaters. If somebody has a very strong opinion because of a news article they read or something, they don't really know what they're talking about, right? They weren't on the ground. They didn't do the research. They're just reading a headline that they absorbed. And that might be fun to talk about, but if they're saying, "Oh, you're wrong," blah blah blah, because I read this thing, you don't know that, right? That's just something they read from one source, and it may be right, it may not be right. But if the person reading it doesn't have access to the actual data or interviews or whatnot that the report is based on, they have no way of evaluating the accuracy of what they're reading. That's why something like community notes on Twitter is so powerful, because we're trying to figure out better ways to actually authenticate reporting in real time. We're getting closer to having a more accurate journalism process, hopefully, through these things. Because you can't trust a scientific paper that's only gone through peer review with no independent replication. You can't trust an article about an event that hasn't had its reporting independently replicated by other journalists, researchers, things like that. And Balaji continues to say that many people do not reason forward from logical premises, but backward from social consequences. People don't go look at the data and try to make a decision based off that. They look at, what does everybody around me think? So what is the safe opinion for me to have so that I can continue to be a member of the tribe? And that's just how humans operate. It's a big part of our conscious operating, whatever. If you haven't read Elephant in the Brain, it talks about this a lot. Fantastic book. But it means that most people are walking around with a lot of false beliefs and that they just hold on to because they're valuable socially. So you really have to dig into what somebody's basing their beliefs and views on. Because if it turns out that it's just what the people around them think, what the podcast they listen to is saying, what the paper they read is saying, then they're not actually very informed on the topic. So if we can't trust a lot of news reporting and things like that, what should we pay attention to? Balaji gives some quite good guidelines. He says, typically people will put war reporting and reporting on Kim Kardashian at opposite ends of the media spectrum. This is super serious Pulitzer Prize stuff versus this is fun infotainment. I argue they're both actually infotainment at the same end of the spectrum, and the other end is news you can use and tutorials. The difference is whether a piece of information is directly relevant to your life. This is a great way to think about news, info, media, whatever, right? Like if something is useful to your life, then it is worth paying attention to you. If it's relevant to you, your family, friends, your work, then yeah, that is valuable for you to absorb. But if this is just the thing of the week that everyone's supposed to pay attention to that doesn't actually impact your life in any way, that's just entertainment. It's no different than keeping up with the Kardashians or watching Bachelor or anything else that you might consider, below you. And you might feel guilty not staying up on all these like big things going on around the world, but you only have a finite amount of time and a finite amount of energy. And Balaji makes this great point about kind of like the math of this, right? He says there are 86,400 seconds in a day. In 12 days, if you learn one of the 7 billion people's in the world's names per second, you could learn the names of 1 million people. So in 12 days, you could learn 1 million people. It would take you 120 days for 10 million people, 1,200 days for 100 million people, and 12,000 days for 1 billion people. It would take your whole life to learn the names of the 7 billion people on the planet. You cannot care about all of them equally. You have to decide at some point which people in the world you're going to care about. And if you don't decide that, it will be decided for you by algorithms and news, social media, whatever, right? Like it will just push onto this is what you're supposed to pay attention to today, and you'll just get sucked into the vortex of like the exciting thing that's going on. So you want to be really intentional. You want to say, what's useful to me in my life? What do I want to learn? What do I want to be informed about? And then as stuff happens that's relevant to that, you absorb that media and you kind of like block out everything else. And on that note, he makes a really good point about how you start your day. He says the first thing you look at personally each day shouldn't be random stories someone else picked. So it shouldn't be a feed, right? Like it shouldn't be your Twitter feed, TikTok feed, whatever, right? It should be carefully selected metrics you want to improve, like your health or hobbies. It should be stuff very relevant to you in your life, not random information that somebody else is throwing at you. And he has this idea here of building a personal dashboard is a good way to disrupt newspapers. And we have bits of that, right? If you have an Aura Ring or a Whoop, you have some health metrics that you can check in on in the morning. If you're building a business, you might check your business metrics in the morning. Like all of those things are way better than opening the feed and saying like, okay, what does the algo want me to pay attention to today? And the last thing I'll mention on this topic of what to pay attention to that I think is really great is he says the newest technical papers and the oldest books are the best sources of arbitrage. They contain the least popular facts and the most monetizable truths. I love that distinction, right? The oldest books that are still popular are going to be the most battle-tested, most valuable, best use of your time. But you also want to be exposed to the new things going on in the world, the new advances and whatnot. And so technical papers are a really great way to stay up on that. I don't actually know where you get the best new technical papers, maybe through Twitter and whatnot. But this distinction is really good because you're getting the like Lindy, battle-tested, tried and true ideas, and you're getting the newest advances in technology, and you're cutting out all of the noise in between. So I think that's a really, really good guideline. Now, that was the information in the book that appealed the most to me, but I do want to highlight 2 other sections that you might find really valuable. One, there is an extensive portion in here on how to start a technology business. It's something Balaji knows a lot about from starting them himself, from investing in them, and honestly, it's better than like most entrepreneurship books that I've read. So if you want to start a business, if you're kind of inspired by some of these big ideas, then that section will be incredibly valuable to you. There's also a great section towards the end on productivity. And again, it distills knowledge from a lot of other productivity books that you wouldn't necessarily have to read if you read this. So in terms of like bang for your buck, it's a very powerful book. You're getting this wonderful perspective on technology, media, truth, news, and you're learning how to build a business and you're learning how to be more productive. That's very valuable stuff. And I think that's what's cool about what Eric's doing with these books is he's really distilling a lot of information into a very tight package, which most business books are kind of fluffy, right? And he's doing the opposite. So definitely pick up a copy of the Anthology of Balaji, grab the Almanac of Naval if you haven't read that, and send this podcast, episode, video, whatever to a friend. I'm really enjoying doing them. I would love to keep doing them. And I will see you next week for another one of these Nats Notes videos. Thanks.